morning, everyone. My name is John Laffey. I am the Information Security Program Manager at Perry Johnson. And today's presentation, we're going to be looking at some of the most common NCRs issued during ISO 27001 audits. Give it just another minute here to let everyone filter in, and then we'll get started. All righty. Here we go. A few notes before we begin. All participants have been muted for call clarity. Additionally, the slides from this presentation will be available shortly after we finish here at pjr.com. Under the training link, there is a past webinar slides link where you can access these slides as well as any other slides from the various presentations that we give on a number of different material. Additionally, a recording of this webinar and all other past webinars will be available for review on YouTube. Simply search for Perry Johnson Registrars and you will find our channel and all of the recorded webinars there. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to go over the objectives of the presentation. Then we're going to get right into the top NCRs issued during 27001 audits, as well as strategies to avoid them. And I will then take as much time as needed after that to answer any questions during the presentation. And if you have a question as we're going along here, feel free to type it out in the questions tab of your GoToWebinar applet, and I will review them and answer them in the order they were asked at the conclusion. Okay, so simply put, it is my goal to try and impart knowledge that I've gained from my 6 years as a lead auditor for 27001 and program manager at PJR by sharing common pitfalls I've seen companies encounter during my auditing experience and hopefully give you guys some strategies to avoid those. Here we go. So the first area we're going to look at where I see a lot of non-conformities is in the risk assessment process, which is basically the foundation for this management system. It kind of drives everything else that happens as far as implementing controls and mitigating risks. So the first common NC I see in this area is that the organization has not defined its acceptable level of risk. There's a specific requirement in the standard 6.1.2 A1 that you must clearly define an acceptable level of risk. What I've seen and heard from clients who haven't done this is they were hesitant to want to set that in stone because on a case-by-case basis, you know, depending on how difficult or expensive it would be to treat a risk, they didn't want to put themselves in a position, you know, where they had to if they felt they couldn't. But what I advise to anyone going through this process is you do want to have a firm, set in stone, acceptable level of risk. But what you can do is you can change the way that you evaluate risk such that let's say, for example, there's a risk that you identify, but it's associated with a system that doesn't have any sensitive data. It's just public data. So that risk could be rated lower than the same exact risk if it was associated with a system that you are in control of that houses PII or some other sensitive type of data, right? You can take in those other factors to determine the overall level of risk. The next common NC I see in this area is the risk assessment isn't being conducted at planned intervals or when changes are made. So a lot of times with the initial implementation of the system, I see organizations do a great job with the initial risk assessment. They take a full inventory of everything they have. They look at all their systems, associated risks, threats, vulnerabilities. They rate their risks. They put treatments in place where necessary. It's wonderful. And then a year or two later at the surveillance audit, you know, I asked to see the most recent risk assessment, and it's the exact same document that I saw 2 years ago. You know, when the initial certification was done. And maybe the organization has had some changes. Maybe they've acquired another company. Maybe they've moved into a new cloud environment. Maybe they're doing different types of work that handles different types of data. Those should all be triggers to, you know, put that risk assessment process into effect. And even if no significant changes have happened, it's good practice to at least review your risk assessment on an annual basis, to say, hey, is there any new technologies? Is there any new controls, new threats associated with our existing systems that we need to reevaluate potential risks, and what we need to do to keep those to an acceptable level. This next one is another specific requirement from the standard in terms of identifying risk owners. And this is one of those things, for whatever reason, a lot of clients on their first go around, I've seen miss this, where they don't have a clearly identified risk owner. And what the logic behind this is, you want to have a risk owner identified. It should be someone who has the authority to ensure that any necessary risk treatments are being put into place. It could also be someone who has technical knowledge related to the risk, so that they can make a coherent decision on, does this risk treatment plan make sense for the risks that we've identified. But there should be, somebody accountable for each of the risks identified, just to kind of help ensure that things don't fall through the cracks. And then the last issue I see fairly common to this area is not prioritizing risks for treatment. So again, there is a specific requirement in the standard that risks be prioritized for treatment. And you can go about this a number of different ways, but it should be clear that, hey, risk A is a big risk. It affects a large number of our systems. It's something that could have a huge potential impact on us if it were to, come to fruition. So we've got this prioritized number one. We're putting, the bulk of our resources and energy into getting this treated first, so on and so forth. That's the idea behind that. All right, access control. So there is a section of controls in Annex A, which is the table that has 144 controls, I believe, as of the current publication of 27001, that you're supposed to, as an organization, look at those controls and evaluate if those controls apply to your organization and what you do, and if so, implement those controls. This is a section of controls that I have seen and written a number of nonconformities against, so I wanted to highlight three of the most common ones to hopefully give you guys a heads up and a leg up, and making sure that you don't fall into the same trap. So the first one is control A.9.2.2, and this is in regards to provisioning user access. And it requires that a formal process be in place to add or remove access rights. On many occasions, I will maybe look at a sampling of user accounts in Active Directory or whatever system the client's using, and just pick one out at random, see what permissions they have, and then just simply ask, okay, how did you know as an administrator to assign these permissions to this user? Ideally, if they could go to a ticket, would be wonderful. A ticket request that says so and so needs these permissions for this reason. It's been authorized by this person who's authorized to do this. Please and thank you. But it could be an email. The idea is that you should have a process in place, and that process should be followed every time changes are being made to user permissions. And that obviously there's a record of that request for your own purposes, and then obviously if you're going to be going through an external third-party audit, obviously for your auditors' purposes as well. The next control in this section that I see issues with on a fairly regular basis is review of user access rights. This is control A.9.2.5. It requires that user access rights are reviewed at regular intervals. I kind of bolded regular because it's up to you as the organization to determine that interval. Should it be monthly? Should it be quarterly? Should it be annually? If it's an interval defined that's greater than annually, your auditor will probably be looking for some solid justification as to why that large of a time gap can lapse between doing this review. But really what this review wants to do is make sure there's some check happening, as I mentioned, at a regular interval. Are the access rights that are assigned to these users Do they still need them? Does this user still need access to the finance folder or that project folder or whatever the case may be? Things change, people's roles change, and obviously you're relying on your formal process to adjust user access rights to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. But this is just a fail-safe, and I can even say, I mentioned it in the next control we're going to talk about, but even if this is a review, just comparing the active roster of employees to user accounts to make sure, right, that there's no user accounts active for people who don't work at the company anymore. I mean, unfortunately, I've seen that happen before. So I think it's a really important control. And again, for whatever reason, one that I've seen missed on several occasions. So I just wanted to bring it to light. And the next one, a removal or adjustment of access rights. So I kind of touched on this, but it is obviously required that user access is revoked upon termination or modified upon job change. And again, as I mentioned, I have seen occasions where there's active user accounts for people who haven't been with the company in months. But even more to the point, I've seen an occasion where there was a user account, the user departed the company on a Friday, and the user access wasn't disabled until the following Monday. This is something you really want to ensure that access is being terminated or disabled at the time of separation. I don't know if you've done it before. I've done it before, not maliciously, but you change roles or change jobs, and hey, do I still have access to this? It's something you might check. So it's critical. You want to make sure that the folks only have access to what they need, and if they're no longer with the organization, obviously you want to ensure they don't have access to any of your assets. All right, the next area we're going to talk about here is physical and environmental security. Just because there's a couple of controls here that, once again, I've written NCs against, and I just see it missed on a fairly regular basis. And these are ones that kind of really are going to go back to your training and kind of, getting buy-in from staff. The first one is unattended user equipment. This control requires that unattended equipment has appropriate protection. And basically, in today's terms, it means if you're going to leave your computer or workstation, it should be locked, right? Now, it's been a little different since we've been doing everything virtually since the pandemic. I don't have as much of an opportunity to kind of walk around and just observe throughout the course of the audit. But when we did go on site, there's been multiple occasions where, as I'm walking to get a coffee or to the restroom or just taking a tour of the facility, you look around and you see screens lit up and unlocked, and there's nobody there. Obviously, there is certainly security threats surrounding leaving your machine unattended and unlocked, right? Anybody could just walk up and do whatever it is they want to do. So again, that's one that I've written a lot against. The other one is clear desks and screen policy. It's in the same vein as the unattended user equipment control, but this is more concerned with not leaving sensitive information out, whether it be on your desk, whether it be in a printer tray, whether it be on the ground, whatever the case may be. There's been lots of occasions where I've seen sensitive material, confidential material, sometimes PHI in some occasions, just sitting out on a desk where there's no one around it, sitting in a printer tray, or sometimes sitting in a garbage bin. But there's also shredders available, and the policies require that certain information be put in the shredding tub, and they're being thrown away just in regular garbage bins. So that's another one, again, that's really going to be driven by education for the employees and just kind of fostering that buy-in into information security as a whole. All right, and this last one, this is compliance, which is section 8.18 of Annex A. And this is just one control in particular because I see this missed, I've seen it missed so many times. Okay, it's 8.18.1.1. and it's the identification of applicable legislation and contractual requirements. And there's two parts to this control. And a lot of times I'll see companies get the first part right, but not do the second part. So the first part is that all legislative, statutory, regulatory, and contractual requirements concerning information security be documented and maintained. And I mentioned here, this can be a daunting task, but it is necessary to have a truly effective information security management system. And the reason being is if you're not fully aware of what you're supposed to be complying with, there's a good chance that you're probably not doing it, right? So obviously there's a number of different statutory laws. You're probably going to have a lot of contractual requirements, and that's probably going to become more and more common as far as information security going forward. There's international privacy laws, there's GDPR. I think a lot of different countries and regions have their own flavor of some data privacy regulations. In the US, California has the CCPA, which is similar to GDPR. But in any case, there's a lot of different requirements around information security and privacy. And the first half of this control is making sure you know what you're subject to and what you have to comply with, and documenting those somehow. It doesn't, there's no prescribed way. It doesn't have to be in a spreadsheet or a database or this or that, but it does need to be documented and maintained somewhere. The other half of this control states that you must also document the approach to meeting each of those requirements. And that's where I've seen typically, in most cases, that portion of it not being met. Now, you don't have to necessarily retype out if you already have policies and procedures, surrounding how you're going to handle, in terms of GDPR, if somebody's requesting to know what information you maintain about them, or they want something to be forgotten. I know a lot of times companies will already have policies and procedures documented in order to meet those requirements. So for this purpose, you could simply reference those policies and procedures. You wouldn't have to retype it on the same document that you've identified them on. But you should be able to reference or to explicitly state for each of those identified requirements how you're meeting and ensuring that you're complying with those. Okay. All right. So I think, that is the end of the most frequently written NCRs that I see, but I would love to take some time now to answer any questions that you may have. So I'm going to pop open the questions tab, and please feel free to fire away. Besides that, I appreciate everybody joining me today for this quick and hopefully informative broadcast. Again, these slides are available or will be available at pjr.com under training and then past webinar slides. And again, you'll be able to see a recording of this webinar as well as all of our other webinars on our YouTube channel. Just search for Perry Johnson Registrars on YouTube and our channel will come up and you can view all of those for free. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions roll in just yet. Just leave it up here for a few more minutes, see if any questions trickle in, but if not, again, thank you guys very much. Also, if you have any other questions about ISO 27001 and you're just not comfortable asking it in this format, feel free to reach out to me. My email is jlaffey at pjr.com. Fortunately, I don't have that on the screen right now. But it is JLAFF as in Frank EY at pjr.com. Feel free to email me directly any questions you may have, whether it be about the standard, whether it be about the process of getting certified, whatever it may be. I will certainly be happy to answer it for you or get you in touch with the right folks who can. Oh, all right. Got some questions rolling in here. From Paulette. She asks, how does 27001 tie into SOC 2? And Paulette, I admittedly am not a SOC 2 auditor. I'm not intimately familiar with everything they look at during SOC 2, but from my understanding, SOC 2 is a little bit different in that they request evidence over a period of months or weeks. So it's not just a single engagement. They require you to send evidence on various different controls. And I think a lot of it has to do with your particular environment and how you scope it. So you're going to be sending them evidence over and over and over and over again in regards to different controls. Whereas for ISO, it's a single engagement annually. We're going to look to see evidence at the time we're there. We take a sampling and we write our findings based on what those samplings show, and then that's it. You are done until the next year. But as far as the specific control sets between 27001 and SOC 2, I can't speak directly to that, so I do apologize. Question here from Brian. Do you think for effective access control you need a dedicated audit staff, or can IT or project teams effectively control? So Brian, I think that's really going to depend upon how large your organization is and how constrained your resources are. But I think for small to medium-sized companies, for access control, especially if you're talking about things like reviewing user permissions, I think that's something that can be done by IT staff, because really, realistically, those folks are going to be the ones who have access to that information. That's what I most commonly see. I think I only have one client who has a separate dedicated internal audit team, and it's an organization that there's a ton of regulatory compliance required for what they do. So they have a team that it's constantly internally auditing against a number of different requirements. But I think for most small and medium businesses, an IT staff or a project team can effectively implement the requirements for ISO 27001, certainly. And I hope that answered both your questions. If it didn't, feel free to follow up. Oh, you're welcome, Brian. My pleasure. All right, a question here from Raymond. If you have not been labeling information prior to deciding you want to go with ISO 27001 certification, what is the best strategy to satisfy this control? Well, Raymond, this probably isn't the answer you're hoping to hear, but honestly, for that control, I think you need to retroactively go through your information and classify it and label it as required. The only thing I would mention, though, is that if you have a classification of information that's like public or not sensitive, whatever you want to call it, but basically it's for documents that aren't sensitive, and there might be, you guys may say for these types of documents or this type of information, no labeling is required. That may alleviate some of the burden. So really, you're just looking to zero in on your sensitive information and make sure those things are labeled. But there's definitely going to be some legwork there. Oh, my pleasure, Raymond. Thanks for the questions. Really, this is what I enjoy most, is when we get to interact a little bit at the end of these things here. So please keep them coming. Is the standard still going to be updated this year, Paulette? So now that it's 2022, from what I've gathered, and I'm not on any ISO committees or technical committees or anything like that, I just scour the web like I'm sure some of you guys do. From what I heard, 27002, which is the standard that really goes into detail about what each control means and how to implement it, gives you guidance on implementing each of the controls. That's supposed to be, well, I heard it was supposed to be updated last year. I didn't see that it was. So I'm guessing it's going to happen this year. It's going to be a fairly, from what I've heard, it sounds like it's going to be a fairly substantial change. I think we have 14 different categories of controls right now in Annex A, and that's going to go down to 4. And I believe the total number of controls is going to be reduced to 96. But from my understanding, if that happens this year, once that change to 27,002 is published, they're going to publish an amended version of 27,001 that references the new control set, but you'll still have 2 years before you have to transition to that new Annex A control scheme and the different categories and the reduced number of controls. But Paulette, honestly, I can't say for certain. ISO moves at its own speed, and I'm not on the inner circle there, so we'll see. But thank you for the question. All right, guys. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you all again for attending. You're in the Midwest like me, stay warm. And I hope you'll have a great start to your year. And keep an eye out. I'll be doing some more of these coming up in the next month or two. And we'd love to have you back. So everyone have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon.